Wellesley-Weston Lifetime Learning offers non-credit courses to seniors in the Greater Boston area. For more information about WWLL and links to our videos, please go to www.llcourses.org.
As soon as we heard about the proposed ban on Muslims entering the country, we knew that our American Issues course needed to address it with a session. The speaker today, Shaheen Akthar, who spoke in Natick, was recommended. And when I got in touch with Shaheen, she immediately invited me to a thank you party in Wayland at the Islamic Center of Boston. This party was being given to thank the neighbors who supported the mosque when it had received hate mail. They were quick to help in so many ways. It was moving to hear the neighbors share how they felt, what they had done, and what they could do to help. These neighbors were not bystanders. They were taking the role of supporters. To combat the stereotyping and fear, Shaheen Akthar, Interfaith Liaison of Wayland Islamic Center of Boston, is working on this now. She spent almost 20 years building bridges among people of all faith traditions. She's committed to nurturing the understanding of the pluralistic values embedded in Islam. She's an educator and founder of many interfaith book clubs, and she mentors and supports others who want to initiate interfaith dialogue in their communities. So we're very lucky to have her today.
Thank you, Ian, for your kind words and organizing this. A warm welcome to you all, and thank you so much for being here. Friends, we have so much in common. We have so much in common. Jews, Christians, and Muslims, we all share a common origin through our patriarch Abraham. So I would like to begin with Islam's connection with Judaism and Christianity. A person who believes in one God, our Creator, and submits to Him, meaning makes a covenant to live his or her life according to His teachings, the Quran, that person is called a Muslim, meaning a submitter in English. And the Arabic word Islam means peace or submission. Islam's message is not new. The story of Islam begins with Adam and Eve and continues through all the prophets. Since Islam is the continuation of the Abrahamic message of monotheism, we give great reverence to the biblical prophets. There are 25 prophets mentioned in the Quran, starting from Adam, Noah, Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Moses, and going down to John the Baptist, Jesus, and Muhammad, peace be upon them, and we believe that they were submitters as well. It is one of the articles of our faith to believe in Jesus, peace be upon him, as one of the greatest messengers of God. The Quran has a chapter called Maryam, which is an Arabic name for Mary. And Mary has been given the highest honor in the women of all nations. And we read Jesus' birth story in the Quran, and we believe in what was revealed to him in Aramaic, the Bible, in Arabic called the Injil. We also believe in Moses, peace be upon him, as one of the greatest messengers of God, and his life story is narrated in several chapters. And we believe in what was revealed to him in Hebrew, the Torah, in Arabic called the Torah, and of course, the Quran revealed to Prophet Muhammad. So throughout our lives, we read their stories and reflect upon them. So these stories are Muslim stories as well. Muslims highlight and celebrate these connections. Prophet Muhammad did not bring a new message. He was commanded to follow in the footsteps of Abraham and call on to all people to acknowledge that there is one God, our Creator, one message, and one humanity. A theme that some would say is similar to the themes in the Bible and the Torah. Islam's message is universal. Islam is not named after any human being or a particular tribe or a race. Islam is about deeds. It is a verb. It is not a state of being. Rather, it is a process of becoming more better and striving to reach that perfect state of submission and connection with all. In one of the sayings of Prophet Muhammad, I find the clearest articulation of this. Once he was returning home from a battle and told his companions that we are returning home from a lesser jihad to a greater jihad, which is an inner struggle to be a better person and to be merciful to others. Unfortunately, the concept of jihad has been grossly misunderstood by some so-called Muslims and by some non-Muslims as well. Compassion represents the true spirit of Islam. If I cannot embrace our common humanity, and if I cannot acknowledge the otherness of the other, and if I cannot respect the sanctity of every human life, then I need to reflect and ask myself, am I worthy of the designation a Muslim? Am I worthy of the designation a Muslim? Islam is about transcending all the differences. The Quran says there shall be no compulsion in religion. The Quran calls on all humanity to come to common terms and strive together as in a race to do good. Islam is not a hodgepodge of cultural and political ideologies and dividing theologies that Quran warns against. It is a simple tradition of peacefulness, ethical behavior, submission to our Creator, in service to His creation. The essence of Islam is to be avoid all kinds of extremes. And we are supposed to be the religion of the middle path. Prophet Muhammad brought a profound message of peace and social justice. What pains Muslims most deeply is when people revile the Quran and Prophet Muhammad. Now let's look at who was he and what was his connection with Abraham and how Islam's primary sacred sites tie into the biblical account. To understand his family lineage and his mission, we need to go back to our patriarch Abraham, who plays a significant role in the development of Islam. In fact, without Abraham, there would be no Islam. This is where it all began. The valley of Baqa, which is the ancient name for the city of Makkah, Saudi Arabia. This valley is referenced in the Psalms 84, 4-6, and the Quran chapter 3, 96 and 97. This house of worship is called the Kaaba, and we believe that this sanctuary had originally been built by Abraham and his son Ishmael. The Kaaba is the center of the Islamic world, and for Muslims, this sanctuary has the historical primacy over all the other houses because of its connection with Abraham and Prophet Muhammad, was commanded to follow in his footsteps to spread the message of monotheism. It is incumbent upon every Muslim once in their lifetime, if they have financial resources and good health, to make the pilgrimage to this sanctuary. Every year, more than 3 million Muslims from every corner of the globe gather here to commemorate Abraham and his family's unwavering submission to our Creator. It is like going back to our roots where it all began, and to reaffirm our faith that there is no God but God, our Creator. And this is the place where Hagar and baby Ishmael were left by Abraham when Sarah banished them. This was a barren land without any water, and this is the place where baby Ishmael starts crying with thirst, and Mother Hagar starts running in search for water, and a spring emerges. And this is the same spring which Genesis makes a reference to, by which Hagar stopped by, known as Beer Lahai, meaning well of the living one who sees me, Genesis 21:19 to 22. And this is the same well we call in Arabic the well of Zamzam, meaning the well of abundance. And this well is still flowing even after 4,000 years and supplying water to all the pilgrims and the city of Mecca. Family and friends bring back some bottles of Zamzam water for their friends. And this is my bottle of Zamzam water my friend brought. And this place is our orientation for our daily prayers, and orientation for throughout our lives, even orientation for our gravesites. And this orientation stands as a symbol of universal brotherhood. And this is the place where Prophet Muhammad was born in the year 570 into the tribe of Ishmael. So through Ishmael, he becomes the direct descendant of Abraham. Friends, we are all cousins. We are all cousins through Abraham's sons, Ishmael and Isaac. And we all belong to the same family of Abraham. Above all, we all come from the same source of reality. And I call that reality in Arabic Allah. And my Jewish friends call that reality Elohim in Hebrew. Allah is not a different God as some people believe. The Quran refers to Jews and Christians as the people of the book. We feel a deep connection with you all, and we pray for you in our daily prayers, all the descendants of Abraham. I sometimes feel frustrated that most people don't seem to know about this shared heritage, that Islam is rooted in the same Abrahamic tradition as Judaism and Christianity. Now, let's look at why was there a need for Prophet Muhammad and what was his mission. So by the time of his birth, people of Arabia had moved away from Abrahamic monotheism. And this sanctuary, which was built for the worship of our Creator, had become the center of idol worshiping. So 600 years after Jesus, peace be upon him, God chose Prophet Muhammad to revive the Abrahamic movement of monotheism, thus reasserting the primordial nature of monotheism. And his ministry was for 23 years. Throughout his life, he had moral concerns about the society and wanted to change the condition of the people. So he used to go up to a mountain cave and meditate there for hours. So during one of these meditations, God sent Angel Gabriel with the first revelation of the Quran. Prophet didn't know how to read or write, so he memorized those verses and then dictated them to his companions. These revelations continued for 23 years and were written down during the Prophet's time. Not a single word of the Quran has been changed from the time of its revelation. All the verses have been kept intact. So if you pick up a copy of the Quran in somewhere Africa, you would not find any difference between that copy and my copy in Arabic. The Quranic message is as relevant to us today as it was 1400 years ago, because its messages of peace, respecting the sanctity of every human life, justice and equality for all. The American values that we all cherish, service, charity, and tolerance, and American ideals of freedom of religion, justice, and equality for all, and liberty. These are all the same principles taught by the Quran to uphold. I do not find any contradiction between the Quranic teachings, the heart and soul of my faith, and the U.S. Constitution, the heart of our nation. I don't find any conflict between these two identities of being a Muslim and an American. I am proud to be an American and proud to be a Muslim. I would challenge those who see Islam and American values as incompatible. There is a long history of bashing Islam as an American and dehumanizing Muslims. Some call it a clash of civilizations, but actually it is a clash of ignorance. Back in the 7th century, the Quran introduced the concept that individuals have inalienable rights, and justice was at the core of its message. It was grounded in protecting the poor and the weak in the society. The Quran was asserting individual rights on the basis of equality of every human being. The Quran stood against all forms of racial discrimination. Prophet Muhammad appointed a freed slave as the first caller to prayer and honored him as one of his distinguished companions. Contrast this with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s struggles and race relations in our nation today. When our country was going through segregation, all the mosques were integrated. The Quran gave rights to women at a time when women were considered property of men and women could own property. The Quran put an end to female infanticide. It posed the question, when the girl child who was buried alive is made to ask for what crime she had been slain. The Quran was countering tribal fights and calling for unity. The Quran was calling pagans to reason, reflect, and ponder over the creation of the universe and their own bodies and acknowledge that there is no God but God, our Creator. But this call to reason did not go well with the pagans. And the Prophet was faced with an enormous opposition and death threats. So God commanded him to move to the city of Medina, where people were receptive to his message of monotheism. And this migration was a turning point in the Islamic history, and our Islamic New Year begins with this event of migration when Muslims achieved freedom of religion. Here in Medina, the Prophet established the first Islamic community and the first Islamic state. He dictated a constitution in which Muslims, Jews, pagan Arabs, and all the other tribes entered into a social contract which became known as the Constitution of Medina, which granted equal rights to everyone, freedom of religion, justice, and peace. This is the first written constitution of human history and the first constitution of democracy in the history of constitutional rule. And this happened in the year 622. And this constitution stands as a symbol of pluralism in Islam. Because of these peaceful teachings, by the time of Prophet's death, all the people of Arabia had come into the fold of Islam. The Quran says, if you kill one human being, it is as if you have killed all of humanity. And if you save one person, it is as if you have saved all of humanity. Islam allows fighting only in self-defense. There are strict rules of engagement. You cannot even harm any crop, harm women and children, or destroy any houses of worship. Furthermore, the Quran states, do not inflict more damage than the enemy has inflicted upon you, but if you are patient, that would be better for you. Contrast this with ISIS's ideology. It is all about politics and power. ISIS is antithetical to Islam. ISIS has declared a war on Prophet Muhammad's covenant with the monks of Mount Sinai. This covenant commands all Muslims to protect Christians and their houses of worship. This covenant gives unconditional protection to all people. And if we disobey, then we would spoil God's covenant. And this covenant is still, you can take a look at it in one of the museums in Istanbul, Turkey. This is the Grand Mosque of Paris. I was there a couple of years ago. This mosque has a profound history of Muslims saving Jews during Holocaust. This mosque was founded by the French government after World War I in 1926 as a token of gratitude to Muslims. More than 100,000 Muslims died fighting against Germany. This mosque was used as a secret refuge to hide Jews during Holocaust. The Imam, Muslim leader, issued fake Muslim birth certificates to protect Jews. Friends, terrorism has no religion. Terrorism has no religion. All religions have hateful radicals. Do you agree? All religions have hateful radicals. Let us not forget the Crusades, Inquisition, Holocaust, Bosnia genocide, the list goes on. Unfortunately, our mainstream media and some politicians paint a distorted picture of Islam and Muslims. Repeated over and over again, these dangerous narratives can harbor hatred. And we have seen that these narratives have resulted in hate crimes, hate attacks on ordinary Muslims, particularly on hijab-wearing women, and mosques arson have become all too common. And over 200 anti-Muslim incidents have been reported in schools from K through 12. All this needs to be addressed by our state and national leaders. According to public policy polling, 26% of Americans think that Islam should be made illegal. And more than half of Americans have a more negative view of Islam and Muslims than in 2002 after 9/11. This is all driven largely by Islamophobia and all the politics involved with it. This book, The Islamophobia Industry, How the Right Manufactures Fear of Muslims by Nathan Lean, Georgetown University researcher, and this report, Confronting Fear, by CARE Council on American Islamic Relations and UC Berkeley Center for Race and Relations, which you can find on www.islamophobia.org, expose the multi-million-dollar cottage industry of fearmongers, network of funders, and all the organizations that support and perpetuate bigotry and xenophobia, and produce a climate of fear. These two charts show the 33 inner groups of Islamophobia network and all the funding. So these groups have spent over $200 million to spread, hate. Some people are literally making a living by spreading hate. Friends, we need to reject the politics of fear. We need to reject the politics of fear. We need to change the narrative from one that incites fear to one that educates and builds mutual understanding and respect among all people. Last month, I read an article in USA Today titled, "A Change of Heart About Muslims." A 68-year-old man named Don Carter in Louisville said in his interview that it is never too old, and I'm a living proof that it's never too old or late to learn. And I always thought that Muslims were a bunch of murderers and thugs. He realized he was wrong after he began reading about Islam, including an article in some church newspaper. Then there was another article titled, that was in Washington Post, titled, "They Took Hatred Out of Me, How Refugee Neighbors Changed the Heart of a Man About Muslims." So positive stories like these and people like all of you give us great hope. We need to not only share these stories, but we need to amplify them. Friends, Islam as a tradition is meant for all places and times, a faith that has sustained billions of followers for more than 1,000 years and contributed enormously to human civilization. And Islam has always been a part of America's story. Today there are Muslim communities on every continent, not on Antarctica, I assume. So here we have world's Muslim population over 1.7 billion. Over 50 countries have Muslim majority populations. Although Islam is often associated with the Arab world and the Middle East, fewer than 15% of Muslims are Arab. And the entire region of the Middle East and North Africa is home to an estimated 315 million Muslims, whereas over 1 billion live in Southeast Asia. And then we have largest population in Indonesia, followed by Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and so on. There are over 8 million Muslims in America. Muslims have been here since the birth of the nation. About a quarter to a third of the slaves brought here were Muslims. Most of them were forced to convert to Christianity. Some of them even served in George Washington's army. You can find names like Muhammad and Yusuf bin Ali on the rosters of Washington's soldiers. Peter Buckminster, who fought in the Battle of Bunker Hill, was perhaps Washington's most distinguished Muslim American soldier. He was born in Framingham, and Buckminster was his master. Years after the battle, he changed his name to Salam, which means peace. Muslim soldiers have given their lives protecting America. According to Department of Defense, more than 3,500 Muslims fought in Afghanistan and Iraq war. You can find tombstones in the Arlington Cemetery with Muslim names. If those soldiers were alive today, they would challenge those who question Muslims' loyalty to our nation. Friends, patriotism and Islam are not mutually exclusive. Prophet Muhammad commanded to all Muslims that loyalty to your country of residence is part of your faith. Muslim legacy flows from slavery through civil war to today. America has had a historical engagement with Islam. Our founding fathers included Islam. Thomas Jefferson advocated for Muslims' rights. He speculated that there would be Muslims in the nation. Ironically, Washington and Jefferson never knew that real Muslims were already in America. There were Muslim slaves on Washington's plantation, though we do not have any records Jefferson owning any slaves. Jefferson had heard of European prejudices about Islam, but he looked beyond those prejudices and wanted to make sure that Muslims, Jews, and all the other minorities have equal rights. He bought a copy of the Quran while he was in the law school. He not only owned the Quran, but he studied it while he was developing his thoughts on the US Constitution. And here is the book, Thomas Jefferson's Quran, Islam and the Founding Fathers. I would recommend this. So there's a long history of presence of copies of the Quran in American libraries going back to 1683. Massachusetts has its own history about the Quran. The first American edition was printed in Springfield, and the copies were sold in Worcester and Springfield. John Adams, who helped to create the Massachusetts Constitution, had a copy of the Quran, which is kept in the Boston Public Library. And I took this picture from Adam's copy. Friends, our founding fathers were ahead of us. Our founding fathers were ahead of us. You will be very surprised to know that Prophet Muhammad's sculpture is inside the U.S. Supreme Court chamber. The statue carries the Quran in one hand. The Quran is open, and you can see Arabic on the pages. This is a great honor given to him as one of the greatest lawgivers of history. At this critical time, when Islamophobia is at its peak, it is necessary to recognize this inclusion as a symbol of the positive relationship our founding fathers had with Islam. If you ask me, can American Muslims and American society move forward together? I would say, yes, we can. Yes, we can. Unfortunately, it has been a very difficult road making any gains toward inclusion. We can do it by following our founding fathers' examples. As George Washington said, to bigotry, no sanction. To bigotry, no sanction. And by affirming our common humanity, the Quran says humanity is not but a single nation. God calls on to humanity, behold, we have created you from a single pair of a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, so that you may come to know one another, not that you may despise one another. I'd like us all to reflect on this verse, which has a profound meaning and inspires me deeply. Speaking to the whole of humanity, the Quran declares, your creation and your resurrection is but as a single soul. The divide we have, the boundaries separating us from others are transparent in the light of the intrinsic oneness of humanity. And this unity of humanity is itself a reflection of the oneness of God, which is the doctrine of our faith. There is no God but God, our Creator. The message is to serve humanity with compassion, mercy, and forgiveness. At the end, I'd like to talk briefly about this poster, which was created by September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrow's Anti-Islamophobia Committee. This organization was founded by members of September 11th who believe in turning their grief into action. They have been working hard throughout these years countering Islamophobia. Robin Bernstein, who is the co-chair of the Anti-Islamophobia Committee, is a member of my Interfaith Book Club. And I am so honored to have this great relationship with this group. A Muslim mother is also a member of this group. who lost her son. He was not in the towers at that time. He was commuting to work and saw the towers burning, so he rushed to help and died there helping. Unfortunately, just because he was a Muslim, his name ended up on terrorist list. Friends, we cannot even begin to imagine what his parents must have gone through. They tried very hard to clear his name. Finally, when his remains were found near the North Tower, his name was cleared in 2002. Friends, we cannot let these dangerous stereotypes divide us. We can only bridge this divide when we begin to recognize that there is no them, there's only us. Because God has sanctified all of our lives. We need to awaken to our shared humanity and ask ourselves, how does it feel like to be the other? This would open up an opportunity for healing and growth. Our common future demands more inclusive communities built upon mutual understanding and respect for all people. Only when we learn to respect others will we know the true meaning of life. Together, we can turn the tide toward unity and peace. Peace be with you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You were going to answer questions, is that correct?
Yes.
Very good.
So I was thinking, why don't we take a few questions and then I will answer this.
Okay.
I applaud the efforts within the Islamic faith who are promoting or trying to disseminate understanding and work together for understanding. But my question is, what is being done by the Islamic community who continue to follow true Islam to combat and re-educate the faction who do distort and teach prejudice and hatred and submissiveness and distortion that result in what we're seeing and is being broadly brushstroked as radical Islam? It seems to me that's where a lot of work needs to be done, as well as educating, promoting understanding within the non-Islamic community, not to carry that to the moderates and the true, Muslims.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for your question. So, Anne.
Well, thank you for your very interesting and informative talk. I'm interested in how the Islamic community and its interpretation of the Quran works within the context of what happens to women in Arab countries, where it is said that the Quran promotes things that constrain women, their dress, their ability to drive, their ability to go out without a male relative, things of that nature.
So we have two questions. We'll take one more. Anne.
How does the Islamic community deal with ISIS? I mean, what are their thoughts? Thoughts? How do they feel? That they're being persecuted because of the way people feel about ISIS and not understanding, the Muslim or the Islamic community.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. So there were 3 questions. All right, so the religion is not at the heart of these conflicts. There are a lot of politics are involved, and there are a lot of countries involved in these politics, so there are a lot of players. And so, yes, the people who are ISIS is not following the teachings of the Quran, and like I mentioned in my presentation, it's all about, politics and power, and there are many players involved in it, and it is a very political conflict. And the women issue, the conflation of religion and cultural practices, and conflation of religion and politics overshadow the Quran's message of peace, mercy, and compassion. And that you need to keep that in mind. And you talked about that, women issue, women are not some women in some countries are not allowed to drive a car. So there is nowhere in the Quran it's written that women cannot drive a car. It is the government who's imposing this, which is totally wrong. And this is happening only in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia does not represent over 1.7 billion Muslims. So that we need to keep that in mind. I was in Dubai, and actually there were women drivers came to pick me up, and I was so excited to see them, which I have not seen in New York. I have not seen any women driver. Now we have Uber women drivers now. So there are a lot of cultural practices in some countries, so those societies are following, and I would say it would take time for them to evolve. And we need to, and the interpretation of the Quran, we cannot ignore the realities of contemporary times. We cannot ignore the realities, and we have over 100 scholars got together and wrote an open letter to ISIS, which I have kept it on the handout table. So I would recommend all of you to pick one of that, that open letter. And so it's because of all these politics, Muslims are being, we are like scapegoat in this whole there and we have to, and what we are also seeing is that there are mass shootings by people of other religions also, but those communities don't have the responsibility of collective condemnation and the backlash as our community faces. Every time something happens, where are the Muslims? Why aren't they condemning it? Of course we are. It grieves us to see loss of lives. But this approach to broad brush all Muslims is wrong. And we all know that ignorance breeds fear, and fear breeds hate. I would like to read a poem. I was giving a talk in one of the libraries, and there was a high school student who was taping my event. So later I got an email from her, and she said, "Thank you very much for your presentation, and I was so inspired, and when my English class had an assignment to write protest poems about what we think is unjust with the world, your presentation inspired my poem, and it would be wonderful if you could read it. So, and she titled the poem, The Phobia of Ignorance, which speaks to what we have. And I, as I highlighted in my talk, those men from, like Don Carter from Louisville, changing his mind after reading about Islam. So this student, Sage, her name is Sage, she writes, "Do not fear those who are different, those of a faith misconceived as terrorism, a faith of peace and tolerance, a faith as common as brown eyes, a faith similar to your own. A faith, for I fear those who are the same, constructing a supremacist society, roping people further into the hatred of individualism, off of a misunderstanding. I fear those who believe that there are limitations to freedom, limitations to the land of the free and equal, rules of who is allowed a chance. I fear those only capable of seeing the worst, categorizing one religion with extremists. I fear those who cannot see past the blindness of their misconceptions. I fear those who do not know the impact of that fear, longing for the sobriety of society, the dawn of awareness, the day people can walk in the street without the fear of being accused of hating their own country. Thank you for your kind words. Sincerely, Sage Grant. She goes to Holliston High School. And I took her permission to read this.
Well, we reached the time that we have to end, but I thought it was really inspiring that you ended with a voice of youth. And I personally think that that's what is going to help us so much. And so I wondered if you would end by giving us all some advice about how we can support.
You know, our Muslim community is so happy and to be working with Wellesley schools. And we have the middle school, Wellesley Middle School, 600 students are going to be visiting our center next week and to learn about Islam. And they have been, sending students for a few years now. And so I think it is very important to, get to know our neighbors. And this education is very, very important for our youth because we are seeing, I just want to end it with, I was at volunteer at a school in second grade, and there was I saw this girl and her name, I thought that she must be Muslim, so I asked her last name and she said, I don't want to say it. At that point, I knew it that she had to be a Muslim. Later, I found out that her last name is Muhammad. A second grader, it's very difficult for this little child to defend herself. So, we have this moral imperative to defend our children and youth from these erroneous judgments. And we applaud what Wellesley schools are doing. And I thank you all for coming here, opening your hearts to listen to me. And just by coming here, you have made a tremendous difference. Thank you.